The more you learn about Count Dooku, the more he becomes one of your favorite characters. That's not a hot take. It's not contrarian for the sake of it. It's just what happens when you actually pay attention. Most people first encounter Dooku as a placeholder villain. Old guy, cape, Christopher Lee being Christopher Lee. He shows up in Attack of the Clones, does some lightsaber twirling, loses his hands in Revenge of the Sith, and then he's gone. Easy to dismiss. Easy to forget. But here's the thing. The character underneath that surface is one of the most tragic figures Star Wars has ever produced. Not because he was corrupted, not because the dark side seduced him, but because he was right about almost everything. And that's exactly why his story hurts. Dooku was born in 102 BBY into the House of Serenno, one of the wealthiest and most politically influential families in the galaxy. Unlike nearly every other Jedi in the Order's history, he always knew exactly who he was. The Jedi took him as an infant, as they did with all Force-sensitive children, but they couldn't erase the fact that he was heir to a Count's title, vast estates, and centuries of aristocratic tradition. Most Jedi came from anonymous backgrounds, orphans of the galaxy raised in institutional anonymity, taught to forget whatever life they might have had before the Temple claimed them. Dooku came from power, and he never forgot it. That awareness shaped his entire relationship with the Jedi Order from the beginning. He was never quite one of them, never fully absorbed into their collective identity. Always conscious that another path existed, that the Temple wasn't the only life available to him. While other Padawans accepted their circumstances as the only reality they'd ever known, Dooku understood choice. He chose to be a Jedi, and that difference mattered more than anyone realized at the time. He trained under Yoda himself. Think about that lineage for a second. Yoda, to Dooku, to Qui-Gon Jinn, to Obi-Wan Kenobi, to Anakin Skywalker. The entire Skywalker saga traces its lightsaber techniques back through Dooku's hands. Every flourish of Anakin's blade, every defensive stance Obi-Wan ever took, every lesson Qui-Gon learned about trusting the living Force, it all flows backward through time to a tall aristocrat with too many questions and not enough patience for answers that didn't satisfy him. Dooku became one of the finest duelists the Order had produced in generations, specializing in Form 2, Makashi, a style developed specifically for blade-to-blade combat rather than blaster deflection. That choice tells you everything about how he thought. Makashi was elegant, precise, economical. Where Form 1 practitioners swung wide arcs designed to deflect incoming fire from multiple angles, Makashi users kept their movements tight, controlled, almost surgical. The blade stayed close to the body. Footwork emphasized lateral movement and angular positioning, rather than acrobatic leaps or power stances. Every action served a purpose. No wasted energy. No flourish without function. The curved hilt of Dooku's lightsaber wasn't vanity, it was engineering. That curve allowed for more precise blade manipulation, tighter angles of attack, subtle wrist movements that could redirect an opponent's weapon with minimal effort. Against another lightsaber, Makashi was devastatingly effective. The style had been developed during an era when Jedi routinely fought each other, when the threat of a Force-sensitive enemy wielding their own blade was common, rather than theoretical. But the Sith had been extinct for 1,000 years. No one expected to fight another Force user in single combat. Practicing Makashi was almost academic, like a modern soldier drilling with cavalry sabers instead of rifles. Dooku practiced anyway. He was preparing for a war the Jedi refused to believe was coming, anticipating enemies they insisted didn't exist anymore. And when those enemies finally emerged, when red blades ignited in shadows the Council had dismissed as empty, Dooku's preparation proved prophetic. He had seen something no one else wanted to see. This would become a pattern. By the time he achieved the rank of Jedi Master, Dooku had established himself as a scholar, diplomat, and warrior of considerable reputation. He sat on the Jedi Council intermittently, though he reportedly found the political maneuvering tiresome. Council meetings weren't about seeking truth or debating philosophy. They were about managing constituencies, balancing institutional interests, preserving relationships with Senate committees. Dooku had joined an order of mystic warriors and found himself stuck in committee meetings about budget allocations. His primary contribution during these decades was training the next generation, most notably his Padawan Qui-Gon Jinn. Their relationship was close, genuine affection between teacher and student, a shared tendency toward independent thinking that set both of them apart from their more conventional peers. Dooku taught Qui-Gon to trust his instincts, to question orthodoxy, to prioritize the living force over abstract prophecy. Those lessons defined Qui-Gon's entire career. His willingness to defy the Council when his conscience demanded it. His immediate recognition of Anakin Skywalker's importance despite the Council's reservations. His death on Naboo pursuing a mission the Council hadn't fully endorsed, confronting a Sith warrior they'd refused to believe existed. The student absorbed the Master's lessons completely, and paid for them with his life. Throughout all of this, throughout decades of service to an institution he'd devoted his life to, Dooku kept raising concerns that nobody wanted to hear. He criticized the Jedi's increasing entanglement with Republic politics, argued that serving as the Senate's enforcement arm compromised their independence and moral authority. When the Council dispatched Jedi to resolve trade disputes at the Senate's request, Dooku saw peacekeepers becoming police. When Jedi accompanied diplomats to negotiate treaties favorable to core world interests, he saw monks becoming mercenaries. The distinction mattered to him even when others couldn't see it. He warned that the Order had become complacent, too certain of its own righteousness to perceive emerging threats. 1,000 years of peace had created 1,000 years of assumptions, that the Sith were gone, that the Republic served the galaxy's interests, that the Jedi Council possessed sufficient wisdom to navigate whatever challenges arose. Dooku looked at those assumptions and saw catastrophe waiting to happen. He questioned whether the Jedi's prohibition on attachment produced balanced peacekeepers or emotionally stunted enforcers. Children taken from families before they could form memories. Raised without parents, without siblings, without any relationship deeper than institutional camaraderie. Taught to suppress feelings rather than understand them. Released into a galaxy they'd been trained to protect, but never actually experience. What did that produce? Wisdom? Or damage dressed up as discipline? These criticisms were documented. They went into the archives. And they were dismissed as the eccentricities of an aristocratic idealist who had never fully shed his noble origins. Classic Dooku, they probably said. Always seeing problems, never appreciating how well the system actually works. The specific flashpoint centered on something Dooku couldn't ignore. The Galactic Senate had become irredeemably corrupt. He observed trade federations purchasing legislative outcomes, corporations writing the laws that governed them, senators accumulating personal wealth while representing impoverished systems. The bureaucracy designed to serve 1,000 generations of citizens had become a mechanism for extracting wealth from the outer rim and concentrating it in the core. The Republic he had sworn to serve was rotting from within. And the Jedi Order, rather than standing apart to offer moral clarity, was embedded so deeply in Republic institutions that it couldn't distinguish service from complicity anymore. When the Senate asked them to enforce unjust laws, they enforced them. When corporate interests demanded protection for exploitative operations, they provided it. The Jedi had become the Republic's sword arm, and the Republic had become a corpse that just hadn't stopped moving yet. When Dooku raised these concerns before the Council, he was told that serving the Republic meant serving the light, that the two were inseparable, that questioning the Republic's legitimacy was questioning the Jedi's very purpose. He disagreed, so he left. Around 42 BBY, a full decade before the events of The Phantom Menace, Dooku made a decision that placed him among the rarest figures in Jedi history. He voluntarily resigned from the Order. In 10,000 years of institutional continuity, only 19 other Jedi had ever simply walked away. Not fallen to darkness, not expelled for misconduct, not killed in service, chosen to leave of their own accord. The Jedi commemorated these departures with bronze busts displayed in a small alcove of the archives, a memorial they called the Lost 20. 20 faces in 10,000 years. 20 individuals who looked at the temple that had raised them, the order that had trained them, the only life they'd ever known, and decided they wanted something else. The busts weren't displayed as warnings or cautionary tales. They were simply acknowledgments. These people existed. They chose differently. We remember them. Dooku became the 20th name on that list. According to later accounts, his departure was considered the most painful of all. Not because he fell to darkness. The archives recorded no such corruption. Not because he betrayed secrets. He left with his integrity intact. But because he was one of them, fully and completely, and he chose to walk away anyway. The Lost 20 represented the Jedi Order's institutional failure to retain its own members. Dooku represented the failure at its most undeniable. A council member, a legendary duelist, Yoda's own student, saying, "This is not enough," and meaning it. The timing matters enormously. He didn't leave as a young knight seeking adventure or an aging master seeking retirement. He left as one of the most respected members of the Order, a former council member, a legendary duelist, the master of a lineage that traced directly to Yoda himself. His stated reasons emphasized ideological disagreement rather than personal grievance. He believed the Jedi had lost their way. He believed the Republic they served had become irredeemably corrupt. He believed that remaining within an institution that refused to acknowledge its failures made him complicit in those failures. So he walked out, reclaimed his hereditary title as Count of Serenno, returned to the estates his family had maintained during his decades of Jedi service. And for several years, he appeared to have genuinely retired from galactic affairs, governing his homeworld with the administrative competence one might expect from a former Jedi diplomat. But retirement was never the plan. He was waiting. The recruitment by Darth Sidious happened somewhere in the decade between Dooku's departure from the Jedi Order in 42 BBY and the Battle of Naboo in 32 BBY. Palpatine, because of course it was Palpatine, recognized in Dooku something useful. A man with legitimate grievances, institutional knowledge of the Jedi Order from the inside, and the aristocratic resources to fund large-scale operations independently. What Sidious offered wasn't merely power, it was purpose. He presented himself as a fellow reformer who understood that the Republic's corruption couldn't be cured from within. He spoke of building something new, tearing down the failed institutions the Jedi protected out of habit, constructing a government that could actually function, that served its citizens instead of extracting wealth from them, that enforced justice instead of protecting privilege. The seduction worked because it contained truth. Sidious didn't need to lie about the Republic's failures. Dooku had documented those failures himself during his council years. Sidious didn't need to fabricate the Jedi Order's complicity. Dooku had watched the Order refuse to address it for decades. What Sidious concealed was his actual intent. Not reform, but domination. Not a new order, but an empire with himself at its absolute center. Dooku believed he was joining a partnership to rebuild galactic civilization. He was actually being recruited as a disposable instrument in a scheme that would discard him the moment his usefulness ended. The Sith name he took, Darth Tyrannus, meant nothing to those who didn't need to know it. To the galaxy, he remained Count Dooku. To Palpatine's inner circle, he became something else entirely, a tool wearing a title he thought he'd earned. But there was one person who saw him for what he was becoming. One Jedi who caught him at the crossroads and tried to pull him back. Master Yaddle. Tales of the Jedi showed us this moment, and it's the scene that breaks the whole character open. Yaddle was one of the few council members who had earned Dooku's respect. Same species as Yoda, centuries of wisdom. None of the political maneuvering he despised in others. She had stepped away from the council herself, understanding the need for distance from institutional demands. If anyone could have reached him, it was her. She followed him, tracked him to a meeting with Sidious, and when she confronted him afterward, she didn't threaten, didn't condemn. She offered him a path back. "Come with me. Tell the council what you've learned. We can stop this together. Whatever you've done, whatever you've promised, it's not too late." The conversation that followed was two people who genuinely cared about each other, standing on opposite sides of an uncrossable line. Yaddle saw her old colleague, a man she'd served alongside for decades, someone she believed could still be saved. Dooku saw the institution he'd rejected, offering one final chance to return to a life he'd already abandoned. He killed her. Not in rage, not in the heat of combat. He ignited his blade and struck down someone who had shown him nothing but compassion because Sidious demanded it, because his new master required proof of commitment, because the path he'd chosen had no exits. And Yaddle represented the last one. That's the moment of no return. Not the departure from the Order, that was principle. Not the alliance with Sidious, that was pragmatism, however corrupted. The murder of Yaddle was something else entirely. It was Dooku choosing his new allegiance over the last person willing to believe in his old self. And then Qui-Gon died. 32 BBY. The Battle of Naboo. Dooku's former Padawan, the finest student he'd ever trained, killed by Darth Maul. A Sith apprentice whose existence the Jedi Council had refused to credit until his red blade made denial impossible. Qui-Gon had been pursuing the very threat Dooku had warned about for decades. A resurgent Sith presence operating in the shadows, while the Jedi congratulated themselves on 1,000 years of peace. His finest student. Someone who had absorbed his lessons about independent thinking and trusting instinct. Dead. Defending a boy the Council didn't want to train, against a threat the Council had dismissed as improbable. The institutional failures Dooku had identified during his Council years had produced a concrete casualty. Someone he'd personally shaped. Someone who represented the best qualities he'd tried to cultivate within the Order. If he harbored any remaining sentiment toward the Jedi after Yaddle, Qui-Gon's death appears to have buried it completely. That same year, 32 BBY, Dooku commissioned the creation of a clone army on Kamino. Operating under his Sith identity as Tyrannus, he approached the Kaminoan cloners with specifications for a military force numbering in the millions. But an army of millions needed a genetic template. And Dooku didn't just pick someone competent. He designed a test. Placed a bounty of 5 million credits on Kamari Vosa, a fallen Jedi leading the Bando Gora cult. Then waited. Watched. Let the galaxy's deadliest hunters compete to claim the prize. The bounty attracted competitors from across the Outer Rim. Professionals, amateurs, desperate opportunists who thought 5 million credits would change their lives. Most died in the attempt. Some simply disappeared. The Bando Gora consumed them all. Only one made it through. A Mandalorian bounty hunter named Jango Fett. The meeting between Tyrannus and Jango Fett, depicted in the 2002 video game Star Wars Bounty Hunter, is one of those moments that stays with you if you were there for it. Jango had just fought through months of increasingly dangerous territory to reach Vosa, survived things that had killed everyone else who tried. He was probably expecting the confrontation of his life. Instead, a cloaked figure emerged from the shadows with an entirely different proposition. The bounty had been a recruitment test. What Tyrannus actually wanted was Jango's unaltered genetic material to serve as the template for millions of clone soldiers. The exchange demonstrated both men as consummate professionals, recognizing each other's capabilities. Two predators circling, neither blinking. Tyrannus offered compensation of any amount. Name your price, whatever you want. Credits, resources, protection, anything a man of violence might desire. Jango, who had spent his entire life accumulating wealth through killing, asked for something money couldn't typically purchase. A son. One clone, completely unaltered, without accelerated aging or behavioral modifications. No programming, no engineered obedience, no predetermined expiration date. Just a child, his child, to raise as his own. Tyrannus agreed without hesitation. The clone army that would eventually destroy the Jedi Order began with a transaction granting one of the galaxy's deadliest killers the experience of fatherhood. Let that sit with you for a second. Two men, both professionals, one commissioning genocide, the other providing the genetic material for it. And the negotiation ends on this strangely human note. A bounty hunter who has killed more people than he can count, asking for the one thing his lifestyle could never provide: a family, someone to carry his legacy forward, someone to be more than he was. And Dooku just nods. Done. No negotiation, no hesitation. Whatever you want. If you played that game on PlayStation 2 or GameCube back in the day, you probably remember this scene hitting different than anything else in Star Wars at the time. Dark. Morally complicated. Adults making terrible choices for understandable reasons. By 24 BBY, Dooku had emerged publicly as the leader of the Separatist movement, arguing for withdrawal from the Galactic Republic. His message resonated because it contained truths the Republic's defenders couldn't effectively counter. The Senate was corrupt. Corporate interests dominated legislation. Outer Rim systems received taxation without representation. The promised benefits of Republic membership had failed to materialize for billions of beings, while core world elites accumulated unprecedented wealth. Thousands of systems joined the Separatist cause based on legitimate grievances. The Clone Wars episode, Heroes on Both Sides, showed us something crucial. The Separatist Parliament wasn't a collection of cackling villains. It was a functioning legislature full of genuine idealists who believed in their cause. Senator Mina Bonteri of Onderon, a personal friend of Padme Amidala, served in that parliament. She had lost her husband to Republic forces. She wanted peace. She believed the Confederacy offered a legitimate alternative to a republic that had failed her world. Padme visited her, saw the Separatist capital, met their senators, and realized something that complicated everything she thought she knew. These weren't evil people. They were citizens who had looked at the same corrupt republic Dooku criticized, and reached the same conclusion he had. The system was broken. Something new was needed. The episode forced audiences to confront an uncomfortable truth. The war wasn't good versus evil. It was two corrupt systems. One openly failed, one secretly manipulated, grinding ordinary people between them. The Separatist senators believed in democracy, believed in representation, believed in everything the Republic claimed to offer, but couldn't deliver. They just didn't know their entire movement was a puppet show staged by Sith lords. Dooku addressed their parliaments with genuine conviction, argued for the justice of their cause, presented himself not as a warlord, but as a liberator. And here's what makes it tragic. He probably believed it, at least partially. The idealist who left the Jedi Temple hadn't disappeared entirely. He just convinced himself that atrocity was necessary, that the ends justified the means, that he was still building something better, even as he authorized war crimes. Mina Bonteri proposed peace negotiations. The Separatist Senate supported her. And then she was assassinated, by Dooku's own agents, disguised as Republic operatives. He murdered the peace movement within his own government to keep the war going, killed one of the genuine idealists his rhetoric claimed to champion, because Sidious needed the conflict to continue. That's the corruption at its most complete, not the fall to darkness, the willingness to destroy the very thing you claim to fight for. On Geonosis, after capturing Obi-Wan Kenobi, Dooku did something remarkable. He told the truth. Hundreds of senators were under the control of a Sith Lord named Darth Sidious. The Republic was compromised at its highest levels. The democracy Obi-Wan served was already gone. He just didn't know it yet. "Join me," Dooku said. "Together we can destroy the Sith." Obi-Wan refused, dismissed the information as manipulation, the words of a traitor trying to confuse a loyal Jedi. He was wrong to dismiss it. Everything Dooku said about Sidious was accurate. The Republic was compromised. The Senate was controlled. The threat was real and present and operating in plain sight. But Obi-Wan was also right that Dooku couldn't be trusted. Truth delivered by a corrupted source remains true, but the source's corruption makes the truth impossible to act upon. The duel that followed on Geonosis showed us Dooku's Makashi at its finest, and its limitations. Against Obi-Wan's defensive Sarisu, Dooku's precision found openings everywhere. The curved hilt angled past Kenobi's guard. The footwork created angles Obi-Wan couldn't cover. Within minutes, Obi-Wan was wounded and helpless. Against Anakin's aggressive Gem So, Dooku initially dominated through superior technique. Raw power meant nothing if you couldn't land a hit. Anakin swung wide, committed too fully, left himself open. Dooku exploited every mistake. The duel ended with Anakin missing a hand. Then Yoda arrived. The duel between Dooku and Yoda represented two philosophies of combat in direct opposition. Yoda's Ataru was all movement, flips, spins, acrobatic offense designed to overwhelm through unpredictability. He turned his small stature into an advantage, attacking from angles no human opponent could match. Dooku's Makashi countered with stillness, economy, precision. Where Yoda moved constantly, Dooku planted his feet and let his blade do the work. Neither could overcome the other. Yoda's speed negated Dooku's precision. Dooku's technique survived Yoda's assault. The stalemate ended only when Dooku created a distraction, collapsing architecture that threatened Obi-Wan and Anakin, forcing Yoda to choose between pursuit and protection. Yoda chose protection. Dooku escaped. But the duel revealed something important about the years to come. Makashi had limits. Against a sufficiently powerful opponent who refused to engage on its terms, the style could be neutralized. Dooku's technique was flawless. His philosophy was sound, and it still wasn't enough. The Clone Wars lasted 3 years. 3 years of galaxy-wide conflict that killed millions, displaced billions, and destroyed civilizations that had existed for millennia. And throughout those years, Dooku served as the public face of the Separatist cause, the dignified count who gave speeches about freedom while his generals deployed chemical weapons against civilian populations. His relationship with Asajj Ventress illustrated the corruption of whatever principles had originally motivated him. Ventress served as his assassin and apprentice in all but official title, a former Jedi hopeful transformed into a weapon through his training. She had been abandoned by the Order as a child, left on a backwater world to survive however she could. Dooku found her, shaped her, gave her purpose. She executed his orders faithfully across multiple campaigns. When Darth Sidious commanded Dooku to eliminate her, fearing she was becoming too powerful, too attached, Dooku complied without hesitation. He ordered the assassination of someone who had served him loyally, not because she had failed him, not because she had betrayed him, because his master demanded it. The man who killed Yaddle for Sidious now killed Ventress for him too. The pattern was clear. The Night Sisters arc showed the final corruption. After Ventress survived her assassination and sought revenge through the witches of Dathomir, Dooku retaliated by ordering General Grievous to exterminate the Night Sisters entirely. Not capture, not negotiate, exterminate. An entire culture, wiped out. Because one of their members had participated in an attack on his person. The man who criticized the Jedi for being tools of political violence ordered genocide to punish an insult. This brings us to Christopher Lee. Because you cannot talk about Dooku without talking about the man who made him real. Lee was 78 years old when he first appeared as Dooku in Attack of the Clones, 82 when the character died in Revenge of the Sith, and he insisted on performing his own lightsaber choreography wherever physically possible. Not because ego demanded it, because he understood the character well enough to know that Dooku's movements mattered. Watch how he holds himself in those films. There's no wasted motion, no flourish for flourish's sake. Every gesture carries weight. The slight incline of his head when addressing an inferior. The way his hands rest at his sides like weapons waiting to be drawn. The absolute stillness before violence erupts. Lee's background informed every frame of his performance in ways audiences sensed without biographical knowledge. During World War II, he served in the Royal Air Force, and later with the Special Operations Executive, British intelligence operations behind enemy lines. The man knew what violence actually looked like, knew what real danger felt like, knew how men who had done terrible things carried themselves. When Lee delivers Dooku's lines about the Republic's corruption, there's no theatrical villainy, no mustache twirling, just a man stating facts he finds tiresome to repeat. The Republic is corrupt. The Jedi are complicit. Yes, of course. Can we move on? He plays Dooku as someone who has already processed his disillusionment, already made peace with his choices, already moved past the moral anguish that might have made him sympathetic. That's what makes him terrifying. He's not conflicted. He's resolved. The death scene says everything. Revenge of the Sith. The opening sequence. Chancellor Palpatine has been captured, or appears to have been captured, by Separatist forces. Dooku waits aboard the flagship Invisible Hand, expecting victory. The duel begins as anticipated. Dooku quickly incapacitates Obi-Wan, leaving Anakin alone. But Anakin has changed. The young Padawan from Geonosis has become something harder, and more importantly, he's abandoned Obi-Wan's defensive Sarisu for his natural style. Gem So. Power, aggression, overwhelming force. This was exactly what Makashi couldn't handle. Dooku's precision required opponents to engage on his terms, blade against blade, technique against technique. Anakin refused. He battered through Dooku's defenses with raw strength, treating the elegant Makashi guard as an obstacle to smash, rather than a puzzle to solve. Where Yoda had been too fast to pin down, Anakin was too powerful to redirect. Dooku finds himself overwhelmed, disarmed, forced to his knees with Anakin's blades crossed at his throat. Then Palpatine speaks. Kill him. And Dooku looks at his master. Because Palpatine is his master, the Sith Lord he has served for nearly 20 years. The partner he believed he was building a new galaxy alongside. What he sees in Palpatine's eyes is nothing but encouragement for his death. In that moment, Dooku understands everything. He was never a partner. He was never building anything. He was a tool. Useful for starting a war, discarded now that the war has served its purpose. Anakin's blade falls. Dooku dies knowing the truth. He left the Jedi Order because he believed they were tools of a corrupt political system. He joined the Sith believing he would help build something better. He spent 20 years orchestrating a war that killed millions, ordering atrocities, betraying everyone who served him, justifying all of it as necessary steps toward reform. And in his final seconds, he learned he had been exactly what he despised, a tool. That's the tragedy of Count Dooku. Not that he was wrong about the Jedi Order. He wasn't. Every criticism he raised came true. They couldn't see the Sith infiltrating the Senate. They couldn't sense the darkness gathering around the Chancellor. They marched their clone army into a trap and died wondering why the soldiers they trusted had turned on them. Not that he was wrong about the Republic. He wasn't. The corruption he documented was real. The Republic died because it deserved to die. The tragedy is that he was right about almost everything, and it didn't matter. Because being right about the disease doesn't justify becoming the cure that kills the patient. Because seeing rot doesn't grant permission to spread it. Dooku saw the truth before anyone else. Tried to leave when staying felt like complicity. Sought allies who claimed to share his vision for something better. And somewhere along the way, fighting monsters, he became one. The more you learn about him, the more you understand. And the more you understand, the more it hurts. That's why he becomes one of your favorite characters. Not because he was a hero. He wasn't. Not by the end. He ordered too many atrocities, betrayed too many people, killed Yaddle, murdered Mina Bonteri's peace, served evil too completely. But because he could have been. Because the man who walked out of the Jedi Temple in 42 BBY, the one who joined the Lost 20 rather than compromise his principles, the idealist who believed in something better, that man existed once. And watching what became of him is watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion across decades. He was right, and it destroyed him anyway. Subscribe for more stories like this.